everyone, and welcome to National Treasure Hunt, the podcast where the secret lies not only with Charlotte, but also with your co hosts. I'm Aubrey,
And I'm Emily.
and we have a very special bonus episode and guest interview for you today. And this conversation was one of my favorite conversations we've had in the years that we have been doing National Treasure Hunt, and that is high praise.
It is. I mean, y'all, I just want to say, a little props to us. We keep delivering. like, and part of the reason that we're able to deliver is so many cool people with really, really fascinating interpretations and stories and all of that worked on the National Treasure films.
Yeah. It's like the gift that keeps on giving and only motivates us to do more and more of these interviews because we keep learning things, we keep meeting amazing people, and we are so excited to bring those conversations to you. And we will introduce you to our guest momentarily.
Yes, but before we can do that, I need to tell you about our social media.
Yeah.
You can find us on both X and Instagram at NT Hunt Podcast. And we're also available at nthuntpodcast.com, if you want to check it out.
So, with that, you guys, our guest today is the one and only Michael Singer. And Michael is the perfect example of someone who you might not know his name, you might not know his face, but you definitely know his work because he was the unit publicist for National Treasure Book of Secrets. And he has worked on, I would say, the vast majority of Jerry Bruckheimer blockbusters that people who grew up watching National Treasure like us really know Jerry Bruckheimer for.
100%. And I mean, don't worry. Michael tells you what a unit publicist does. So, we're not going to tell you right now. But he was involved in so much of National Treasure 2 and has so many amazing things to share.
Yeah, I think that's really why we were excited about this conversation. Sometimes we set up interviews with people and we just have this feeling that they'll have amazing stories, but we don't really know where the conversation is going to go. And this is one of those conversations where we learn not just about the day-to-day publicity during the filming of Book of Secrets, but also tons of stories about what actually was going on set because he had to be there to liaise between the cast and, John Turteltaub and Jerry and anyone from the outside who wanted to interface with them from a news or publicity perspective. So, this is such a good conversation that we want to dive right in, but we will whet your appetite and tell you a couple things to look forward to in the convo. Um, First and foremost, Michael's story is amazing, and you will learn how the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey truly changed his life.
Yes. You will also learn which A-list actor was especially impressed by National Treasure's massive sets.
And this one blew my mind. You're going to learn for the first time on our show, and so I suspect really the first time ever, the secret behind how the Cibola set was actually flooded. You're going to be that emoji where the brain is exploding. I promise.
Before your brain explodes, though, let's get into this episode.
And please join us in welcoming Michael Singer to National Treasure Hunt. He worked hand in hand with Jerry Bruckheimer as a publicist for more blockbusters than you can possibly imagine, including National Treasure Book of Secrets. He has had tons of experience operating quietly behind the scenes, so we are truly honored that he has agreed to take a turn in front of the camera with us today. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on National Treasure Hunt. Welcome.
Thanks, Aubrey and Emily, and the honor is mine. Totally.
Okay, this is going to be such a fun conversation. We were chatting a little bit before we started recording and told you how much our listeners love learning the behind the scenes tidbits. So any of your memories, we welcome with open arms. But, before we get into the national treasure of it all, we always like to kind of introduce our guests to our audience as a human, right? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your personal journey. Where are you from? How did you find yourself entering into the entertainment industry, etc.?
Okay, this is a weird story, and how much time do you have? Because it's a rather long, twisted tale, but I'm going to give you the very, very short version. Um, I'm from Flushing, New York, Queens, uh, city dweller. Once I, took the 7 IRT or the 2534 bus, I could get into Manhattan and everything that offered. I've been a film buff since I was 3, and film became an obsession very, very early in my life. To the point where when I was a kid, I actually wrote film reviews for nobody except myself.
Aw.
Wow.
And uh, I mean, that's how crazed I was. I was so crazed that I would open the movie pages of the New York newspapers. And those were back in those days, there were a lot of advertisements for films. And they had all the credits, who produced it, who directed it, who the screenwriter was, who did the music. And and this was instead of schoolwork, by the way, I
Of
would
course.
just type out, the credits that I gleaned from the ads, again, for no particular reason, so that, even today I can, by memory, tell you that How the West Was Won was released in 1963 by MGM and Cinerama, produced by Bernard Smith, directed by Henry Hathaway, John Ford, and George Marshall, screenplay by James R. Webb, based on the Life magazine series, music by Alfred Newman, um, running time 2 hours, 35 minutes. I mean, I was a bit of a freak,
That's
admittedly.
incredible.
That's
Um,
amazing.
but and I never, I dreamt of somehow getting in film. Never thought it was possible. I didn't have an uncle in the industry. I come from a blue collar working class family, lived in a city housing project. My dad was a New York City cab driver. Um, but uh, when I, okay, now I'm really going to shorten it. When I was 15 and a half years old, I wrote a fan letter, a very bad one, to Stanley Kubrick after seeing 2001: A Space Odyssey in its original Cinerama run. The movie just completely, totally overwhelmed me. And I wrote him a fan letter, very badly written. I was a not very smart 15-year-old kid. And a few months after that, it was in February of 1969. I wrote him the letter in 68 after I saw the movie. My mom, bless her heart, she was working in Manhattan, and she would bring me Variety, the trade
Mhm.
paper, which at that point came out once a week on Wednesdays, and she would bring it home to me every Wednesday. And I got very excited because in early February, the issue had headlines all about 2001 and how 2001 had actually become a gigantic hit. And there was a sidebar story on the front page about 2001 fans. And
Mhm.
I'm reading this thing, reading every article about 2001, and suddenly I'm reading Michael Singer, 15-year-old from New York, from Flushing, New York, claims to have kept everything written on pic, in Variety speak, picture. And I mean, I completely freaked out. Did a spit
Mhm.
take, and ran around the room screaming, and then went to the phone and called the guy who wrote the article at Variety. And okay, he introduced me to a wonderful man named Mike Kaplan, who was the publicity director of MGM and the guy spearheading the 2001 publicity campaign.
Ah.
Mike used me as a kind of a spokesperson for the 2001 teen fan, brigade. And so I was getting interviewed back then, and that was the only time in my life I ever did interviews. And then Mike, bless his heart, let me hang around. After school, I would go into Manhattan, go to the MGM offices at 1350 Avenue of the Americas at that time,
Mhm.
and hang out in the MGM publicity offices watching what Mike did and what the other publicists did. And um and then started writing reviews. Once I got into college, wrote reviews for my college newspaper and for an
Nice.
underground newspaper in Queens, got on the screening list. And in 1970, I was hired for a summer job in the publicity department of Paramount Pictures. And
Wow.
it kind of went from there. But I mean, that origin story is truly bizarre and kind of wonderful. And that is how I found out what publicity was, how I found out I wanted to be a publicist, and on it went from that point. The-
Wow. I mean, that essentially is something out of a movie.
Yeah.
That origin story for you, so I love that for you. Um, but you said, this is when you kind of found out, like, what the role of a publicist was. So for our listeners who are unfamiliar, what is the role of a unit publicist for a film?
the role of a unit publicist is to be the publicist on set with the film company. Primarily it's a freelance job. So like everybody else on set, we go from film to film, and you know, we we try to get gigs, and we're lucky when we get hired. But the unit publicist is the on-set publicist who is the intermediary for the publicity campaign between the studio publicity department. You're working with the studio publicity department, and they're really calling most of the shots.
Mhm.
But you're also on set dealing with very, very specific, sometimes very specific on-set issues, because you're also the intermediary between the local media, if you're shooting on location, and the film, as well as often, working, public relations, old-fashioned word for publicist. But you do work with the public. You often work with politicians. You often work with people from the community or from the country that you happen to be in. And you're the guy on the ground. You're the guy with the boots on the ground who the studio can come to and say, okay, we need to make this happen, like a photo shoot or behind the scenes shoots, or to get
Mhm.
the EPK or the behind the scenes interviews done. And I do most of those these days, which I love doing. And also, working to make sure that the actors, the filmmakers, are all getting what they need from, uh, what publicity concerns they have, and then to inform the studios, so that you give them a foundation for then building their campaign. Because once the shoot is over, we're gone. The only thing that we have left to do is to write the production notes, the press notes, which are used by the media. Um, and uh,
Ah.
and so, our work can change from day to day, but there are consistencies that we're expected to do. And I hope that explains something.
Very much so,
Definitely.
yeah, and honestly, it makes me even more excited for the rest of our conversation because I'm excited to hear about how that manifested for you in terms of National Treasure too, but in order to get there, I do wanna kind of take one more step back and acknowledge, what we were saying before we started recording. Our patron saint of National Treasure is, of course, Jerry Bruckheimer, who you have worked with over many, many years on projects beyond just Book of Secrets. So I'd love to hear how that collaborative relationship with Jerry actually formed and how it developed over the years.
Well, the luckiest break of my life was actually doing a film for Jerry, and then maintaining that relationship
Mm.
over the span of many, many years. Uh, I was hired by Jerry, fortunately, to be the unit publicist of Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down. And that was back in 2001, which turned out to be one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. And, I loved working for Jerry, and he seemed, he seemed satisfied with the job that I did. So, very kindly, Jerry, had offered me a couple of other films, which I wasn't able to do because I was busy on other things, and I felt terribly because I really wanted to work with Jerry again. And then in 2005, uh, Jerry offered me an offer I absolutely could not refuse, and thankfully he did it with enough advance time so that I was able to clear my schedule for 2 years, and those were the back-to-back shooting filmings of Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3. And that was, of course, a very, very long shoot, and further solidified my relationship, my working relationship with Jerry, and, uh and so right before National Treasure, we finished National Treasure, excuse me, we finished Pirates 3, and we were going like National Treasure 2 was starting very, very soon after filming finished on Pirates. So Jerry asked me if I wanted to do NT2, and I loved the first film, so of course, and I wanted to continue my relationship with Jerry, and of course I jumped at it. But on top of that, Jerry asked if I was interested in coming into Jerry Bruckheimer Films and Television, as not only the unit publicist on their films, but also the in-house VP of marketing and publicity. So I worked full time for Jerry from 2007 until the pandemic, and was the unit publicist on every film Jerry produced over that period of time, with one exception, because I was on Top Gun Maverick, and Bad Boys 3 was shooting at the same time, so I wasn't able to do two films at once. And that was a really glorious 13-year period, which I have to say, ended completely amicably. The pandemic changed a lot of things in the industry, and that
Mhm.
was one of them. But I've worked for Jerry since, and I look forward to more of those assignments. I really cherish the man. There's really nobody like him.
I will say if we've learned anything from having so many discussions with people around National Treasure, it feels like, and we obviously haven't had the pleasure of meeting Jerry ourselves, but the impression that I get is that his productions are like a family in a way, and people very much will move from
For
project to
sure.
project because they have such a good experience, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, uh, it's great. There are a number of people who Jerry likes to work with again and again and again, and everybody is loyal to Jerry because they love working for him. He's a gentleman. He's strong. He is a complete filmmaker in his own right. Even though Jerry has never directed, Jerry knows he could do everybody's job. He is brilliant in the editing room. He is brilliant at casting. When you look at how many young actors started their careers really with Jerry on Jerry's films, it's astonishing. So, he's great to be around, and there haven't been too many producers in our time who became household names, and Jerry is one of them. Maybe the only one. And, if you're lucky enough to be in his company, you want to stick around for as long as he'll have you. But yeah, definitely
Yeah.
a family feeling.
Wow. I love that. And I mean, it seems like kind of, the beginning, middle of that time period that you were, working with Jerry was, like you said, on National Treasure too. Um, and so, you mentioned that you were familiar with the first movie before kind of coming on board National Treasure 2. Um, and then with this family style relationship, we have, as Aubrey said, we've heard this about everyone that is involved with the films. And so John Turteltaub, who also works quite frequently with Jerry Bruckheimer, right, was the director on the film. So in your role as a unit publicist, how did you work with John?
Every day and very closely.
Mm,
I had a wonderful relationship with John. You know, I of course kept John in the loop about anything and everything, and to get also his sign off of anything, any
mm,
publicity activities that were going to happen on set. Whether those were press visiting the set, and there was some press visiting the set, journalists from the LA Times, and we had a when we were shooting in London, we had a very big group of international journalists, primarily European, but also some, if I recall, from Asia. Those are international press junkets, and that we often do on set. And of course, I had to keep uh, John and of course everybody else, all of the leading actors, and to inform pretty much all the department heads what was going on.
mm.
So you know, the relationship with John was day to day, and he is not shy about giving his opinion. He he is truly one of the wittiest, funniest, and has a wicked sense of humor. But loves making movies and does it with so much enthusiasm and so much charm. You know, I think that John's films, including and you know perhaps especially the National Treasure films, have the kind of light, charming touch that you'd have to go back to some of the Hollywood classics to see films that move that with such fleetness and
Yeah.
lightness of tone, and at the same time you really care about the characters. And that's you know that's all JT, as we usually
Yeah.
called him.
Ooh, okay, next time we talk to him, we're gonna call him that, and he'll be like, "Where did you—" He's a good friend of ours. We chat with him frequently. He's been on our show many times. He actually, I know you write books about Jerry Bruckheimer Productions. We have a couple books ourselves, and John wrote our most recent foreword because he's very kind.
That is amazing. I didn't have the opportunity to write a National Treasure book, unfortunately, because I would have loved to.
Mm,
But I did write a making of book for The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which I
Saw
also
that.
worked on.
Yeah.
And
mhm,
you know, I think it's a different subject, but I think Sorcerer's Apprentice is an underrated film. I think I loved working on it, and I loved the results. And uh, and it you know again I was so thrilled to work with John again
yeah,
and
yeah.
on that film, and I miss him. I miss him because it's been a number of years. So next time you talk to him, please tell him that Michael Singer sends his love to he and his family. And
I will.
yeah, thanks.
We will absolutely, absolutely pass that along. Something that you said really makes me feel like National Treasure as a franchise has been this like secret sauce, right? It was the perfect combination of the top level gravitas and understanding of filmmaking that Jerry brings with John and his direction. I can see his wit and his personality in the characters, despite the fact that he wasn't, the screenwriter, let's say. And then that in combination with the cast, the delivery, Emily and I have had so many conversations on this podcast about how National Treasure would have looked so different. And frankly, we think been less successful if we had a different cast filling these roles. So, speaking of the cast, I'd love to hear if you have any fun stories or memories of working with, frankly, any of the cast members from National Treasure 2 that come to mind.
I mean, I have fun memories about working with all of them.
Yay.
There aren't there aren't necessarily specific anecdotes. It's just the day to day work and seeing them at work and seeing
Mm,
the professionalism, the enthusiasm, joy that they brought to it. Um, of course, it was a great reunion for most of our leads, and then having somebody like Helen Mirren join that assemblage. And the great thing about Helen was how much she loved the experience. Here is this extraordinarily distinguished British actress whose career has went back so many years, and again, and from the highest level of British theater and filmmaking, and what a kick she got out of the immense sets, the her character, which she adored,
Mm.
working with all of the actors, her the kind of chemistry she had with John Voight, um
Yeah.
uh, and and how much she loved working with John and Jerry. She actually, in her autobiography, she wrote wonderful things about Jerry and about her experiences on National Treasure. Uh, and and I had worked with Nick before on a film called 8 Millimeter, and I knew very well how both serious and fun he is when he's at work. Um, uh, Diane was, again, very professional and very serious when she's working, but with, again, a joyful attitude. I mean,
Mhm.
I know that some of this sounds like, oh yeah, well, he was the publicist. What is he supposed to say? But I'm telling you
Yeah.
that that chemistry that you see on screen was absolutely authentic.
That's
And
cool.
Ed Harris, who again I had worked with before, and Jerry had worked with before, um, brought a lot to that role.
Mhm. Mhm.
And our two villains, Michael Mays and Tim Murphy, who I know you've had on your podcast.
We
Yeah.
have.
I'm still Facebook friends with them, and w- w- uh, I joined the family myself. I was a newcomer, and they took me in, and they put me in their warm embrace. And every day, every one of the 97 days of shooting was, considering the locations and the sets. It was it w- it. We all had our own adventure on the show, on the film. We really did.
That makes so much sense to me, and also, I mean, it is really interesting. Something else we've marveled at is how this franchise really did pair up some heavy hitters in from the actor capacity in the industry with, at the time, a couple of people who were a little bit newer on the scene in Justin Bartha and Diane Kruger, and since that time, there's not a single lead role on this movie that is not, like, a majorly recognizable name at this point. You even look at someone like Timothy Murphy, who was a henchman,
For sure.
and or Mark Pellegrino in the first National Treasure movie, for
Right,
example,
right.
and these are now, extremely well-regarded and well-established actors in their own right, and I don't know, it definitely says something about the ability to cast good actors, but also I think says something about the quality of these movies as well, that these are the kind of actors it's launching, you know?
There was a lot of laughter on set.
Mm.
It was, look, there was a lot of hard work and a lot of serious work, and when you have actors drenched to the bone day after day for weeks,
Mm.
you might think that you'd hear a lot of grumbling. I never did. I never did. I just saw people who were, determined, professional, but managed to find levity in virtually every situation, and uh, met every challenge with great diligence and also a great sense of fun.
That's also impressive considering, like, what they were doing in the water on the Cibola set and everything like that. That's gotta be real tough.
Not easy. I mean, I don't know if, anybody described the, the dunking tank, there's when when they're getting soaked in that part of Cibola, where the water is filling up and that was that was that was a set that was actually being lifted above a tank at Falls Lake at the at Universal Studios on the back lot by 100-foot tall crane, and then being dunked into the water with the actors in them to give the effect of the water rising to here. And
What?
and you're going through that on day after day. uh, is actually, I think, night after night, because I think those might have been night shoots.
Mm.
Because of course the set was supposed to be an interior, so it had to be dark. Um, Remarkable. And of course, all the Cibola sets that had the waterfalls, we had our actors drenched to the bone for weeks of that.
Um, I'm mind blown actually because we've had so many conversations about that scene, including with stunt people, for example, who were very either watching or advising and whatnot, and we never learned that about the like dunk tank element. And gosh, Emily, this is why these conversations are so fun. You know what I mean?
Well, that was
100%.
what did we call that particular um well, it was of course one of the cavern sets. By the way, there were 45,000 gallons per minute of water being pumped into one of those Cibola sets, with the flood sequence, the flooding sequence. Um I mean, just some of these were unreal. There were 4 submersible pumps that were pumping out the water so that the entire stage didn't flood. The 2 biggest sets, the pyramid sets, the Cibola, that was shot on stage 12 at Universal, which is probably, I think, the biggest set in Hollywood, and a set that I've worked on many times. And there have been a lot of extraordinary sets built on stage 12, including Singapore for Pirates 3. I was there for that. And the Penguin's Lair for Tim Burton's Batman Returns, which I also worked on.
What?
So they managed to build 2 gigantic sets on that one stage for National Treasure Book of Secrets. And it was just extraordinary.
That is so cool. I mean, the fact that we have not heard that information yet is insane.
Well, the
I mean,
Cibola pyramids and the balance chamber, the
mhm,
teeter-totter, were on the
mhm.
same soundstage. And those were 2 massive, gigantic sets. So that'll give you a sense of how big that stage is.
Crazy.
My gosh, that must be, yeah, that's
And
crazy.
that balance chamber set, um, by the way, our stunt coordinator, George Marshall Ruge, who's still a great friend of mine, and I don't know if you've ever had a chance to speak to him, but what a job he
Mm-mm.
did on that show. The balance chamber was constructed by one of the great geniuses of practical special effects, a man named John Fraser and his crew. And it was, a computerized gimbal. So the coordination between, what the actors were doing and the action, the fight scenes, and this, I mean, I spent some time on that set while it was working, and as if I didn't get seasick enough from being on the open sea for the Pirates movies, I got even more seasick being on the balance chamber set.
I know Emily resonates with that. Emily has
That
feelings
one
about that balance
stresses me
platform.
out. The tilt platform seems so stressful to me. I I mean, the amount of effort that I feel like would have to go between the computer control, right, like, of that, and then just the actors not falling,
For starters.
right? Just, like, alone is insane, more or less anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't as high as it looks to be in the final film, but it was it I don't have the exact dimensions, but that thing was way off the ground. And yeah, you have some of the most distinguished, not to mention well-paid actors in the world on that thing. And of course, they were very, very careful to I mean, there was ne- uh, there was never I don't think there was ever any real danger because that's what the professionals are for. That's
Mhm.
what stunt coordinators, the stunt team, the special effects crews to make sure that nobody can get seriously hurt. But still, um I watched those actors in many precarious positions
For sure.
in that film. And the Mount Rushmore scenes. Um that I was lucky enough to I was lucky enough to be taken by the superintendent of Mount Rushmore, wonderful man named Gerard Baker, who was the first Native American superintendent
Oh.
of Mount Rushmore. Uh, we were doing like a little scout, and I was lucky enough to be there. And I stood on George Washington's head, and let me tell you, if you look down from that point, and obviously there are no barriers up there to prevent you from
Totally.
sliding right off. It, it's truly incredible. Truly incredible.
For sure. Well, okay, then this is making me wonder if you have any other standout behind the scenes memories from at any point in this movie's filming because I mean, this is the thing about this movie, right? There's so much on location filming as well. You already mentioned the being in London. Of course, there's the huge Library of Congress piece. I mean, there's just so much going on here. Anything that stands out to you, we are all ears, my friend.
Oh my God. Well, okay, the Lincoln Memorial scene. Um, the authorities gave John exactly 13 minutes to shoot that scene at dawn. At like literally 13 minutes. And you can't imagine. I mean, a crew of about 100 people getting their stuff together, and and John and Nick and mounting a scene in the Lincoln Memorial. You've got 13 minutes in which to shoot it, and you actually make it happen. That's
That's
jaw
crazy.
dropping. That's jaw dropping. Um,
Pressure.
uh, so much. And yet, everybody somehow kept it together. They got the shot, and no rules were bent. Or how about shooting in Lafayette Park?
Mhm.
The scene with the White House in the background, and the authorities say, "So sorry, but we have to move you away from here. And can you please go to the other side of the park because President Bush has to come out and address the press corps." So interrupt filming. Away we went. President Bush finishes addressing the press corps. Back everybody goes to finish the scene. And then
Whoa.
filming all night in the actual Library of Congress in the Jefferson Building, and 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 to see the art department under the production designer Dominic Watkins, who's some kind of a genius, um, build a set for the president's
Mhm.
library in the upper reaches of. I mean, we're in the Library of Congress, and we're building a set. We're not only shooting inside the Library of Congress, but a set is being built inside the Library of Congress
Mhm.
and shooting there night after night. And or how about filming at Mount Vernon, not recreating Mount Vernon, filming at Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington, for the sequence there. And, um, for the party scene, one night, it was filmed over, I don't remember how many nights, but one night, 28 degrees Fahrenheit with
Oh
with
my
with some pelting rain on occasion. And you have, actors in tuxedos and women in strapless dresses and somehow getting that done. But being on on such hallowed ground for a film which is firmly rooted in American history adds something to a production that is ineffable and incalculable, uh, that can barely be described until you see the film. And, it was truly a merging of what the film was about and the circumstances of the shoot. And that was unforgettable, just unforgettable.
That's so special. And one thing that you said that I'll just double down on because I think it does really tell the story of what National Treasure is. The fact that you all went to the Library of Congress and built a set on an empty portion of the balcony as a it's not like there were a bunch of bookshelves there already and would make it really easy to just, like, slip another book in, you know what I mean? Which would have made sense. That Yeah, the fact that instead of just building that set elsewhere in Hollywood was not what was done here because it is the ethos of this franchise, and I'm sure you know how much this franchise has done for the historic locations that it features in terms of audience interest and everything like that.
Absolutely.
One thing that I do wonder, when you were working at those sites, um, were like those sites publicity teams eager to engage with you? Were they capitalizing on your visit in real time, or is that something that only came later after the movies
No,
came
it
out?
only came later. I mean, because I don't recall information getting out immediately. I mean, of course, there were some news outlets, local news outlets, that definitely picked up the fact that we were there. I know that there was some coverage in DC newspapers and news outlets, and also in South Dakota.
Mhm.
Rapid City is not a huge city, and obviously we're shooting at Mount Rushmore. We're shooting at Mount Rushmore,
Mhm.
and at a time when it was also open to the public. So the information was getting out. I know that, I mean, I spoke to many of the authorities from the various locations, and um, I know that they were excited about using our presence at a certain point, more in the future, more around the time that film was going to open,
Mhm.
because obviously, because publicity wise or promotion wise, that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Um, they were all, I mean, the enthusiasm was quite marvelous. Um, the organization that runs Mount Vernon were terrific. Of course, the government authorities, in charge of, and this was more, of course, for the location managers, um, who made the deals for us to film in those places. And it was the same, of course, in England. It was the same in Paris. We obviously couldn't film at Buckingham Palace,
Mhm.
but we were
Mhm.
shooting practically down the street inside. I think it's an 18th century edifice called the Lancaster House,
Mhm.
which is a stately mansion and was brilliantly used as a double for the interior of Buckingham Palace. Um, and uh, and of course, filming through the streets of London for the car chase scene, all over. I mean, that was remarkable. Filming
It's
all
like
over the financial district called the City, one of one of the most heavily trafficked parts of London. And in Paris, filming on the Pont Bir Hakeim, the bridge right near the Statue of Liberty. Again, I don't know how we did it.
I
But the
love that.
magic of actually being there.
Mhm.
was just extraordinary.
I can't even imagine, and honestly, we could probably have this conversation for hours. We won't do that to you today, but just so you know, everything you've shared has just been so fascinating, and also just the hearing the reverence and how much you appreciated being a part of the project is really cool for us and will be for our listeners as well. One thing that I feel like I have to ask is either as this was being filmed or eventually when the movie was released, do you remember fielding inquiries about the possibility of a third film in the franchise?
I was hoping for one.
Okay.
Um, I yeah, I believe that when we were doing, publicity, release publicity for the second film, I'm sure that there were a lot of journalists who asked about a third. And I mean, only a few asked me. Really, it was more them asking Jerry in interviews, or John in interviews, or Nick, or the other cast members. And I think everybody probably said, the same thing, was like hope so.
Yeah.
Um, I'm still hoping.
Frankly, so are we,
Are
of
we?
course. And then okay, one other question then before we start wrapping up that I have to ask. Aside from, will there be a National Treasure 3? Was there one question that you or the cast or anyone else who's doing interviews for press, for publicity, um, was there one question that you remember getting very frequently or that the cast got very frequently?
I think it was, what's it like shooting on these real locations?
I could see that.
Um, because I think the press was journalists were just as surprised as anybody else would be that we were actually able to film inside the Library of Congress, inside the Lincoln Memorial, at Mount Rushmore. Instead of building Mount Rushmore on a soundstage. Um, eh, eh, I just think that there was an overall sense of near disbelief that we were actually able to get permission to film in those places. But I think the respect that the authorities had for the fact that, the films are a romp, obviously, but the films also take history very seriously. And to
Mhm.
try to make American history and world history fun, entertaining. On a personal note, I have to just add that both my daughters really loved the first film and were thrilled when I got to do the second film. They were somewhere among the kids in the Easter egg hunt, the White House Easter egg hunt scene. I don't think they're on camera, but they were there that day at Huntington Hartford Gardens where we shot that scene. And especially my older daughter started to develop a very serious interest in American history, and she was really inspired by both those films. She ultimately became an American history major at UC Berkeley and graduated with honors, I'm proud to say. And
Wow.
and National Treasure had a major, major impact on that. And I think, and you would know probably better than I do, that the film had that kind of influence on untold millions of young people, and for that matter, not so young people. It
Mhm.
just sparked a new interest in American history and in history in general, and of course played with some of the facts, but like Chad Oman, who's an president of Jerry Bruckheimer Films, as he said in his interview while we were making National Treasure 2, he said the thing is, you could Google almost anything, any historical event that is depicted or brought up in the film, and learn tons about it, because all of them, except the president's secret book, are based on fact. And who knows about the president's secret book?
Yeah. Well, it's the reason we have 170 podcast episodes and counting, 2 books and, et cetera, et cetera. So 100%, right?
Right. It obviously inspired both of you,
For sure.
It
just a little.
it did. Definitely. Okay, so I mean, like Aubrey said, we could literally talk to you all day about this and National Treasure stuff. But, starting to wrap up here, I, I kind of wanted to go almost like back to the beginning of our conversation and hear from you. What did you enjoy most about working with Jerry Bruckheimer for so many years? Because clearly, it was a great time.
Watching a master at his job do something that, Jerry is so passionate about film. And, in the end, and he says this himself, what he loves about it the most is just making movies because as a kid growing up in Detroit, movies meant as much to him as it did to me and a lot of other film buffs. But then watching Jerry take that passion and translating it into the practical task of being a film producer, and watching a man, a lot of times, people who haven't worked with Jerry before wonder who he is when he's on set because Jerry has his cameras. He loves taking behind the scenes photos. And so often he's mistaken as the unit photographer.
My gosh.
Um, you know, Jerry doesn't come to the set, with a big brass band beating the drums. Jerry just he's there. And if he's actually, shooting photos, which he often does, then he seems like a special photographer who's come to set in addition to the unit photographer. But then, he sits in Video Village along with the director, along with the DP, and he's just razor sharp in what he's looking at. He knows the film that he wants. He has the film in his mind, but he's also very supportive of the creativity of his directors. So
Mhm.
he lets them do their job, and then in post-production, he helps shape the final product. So watching Jerry produce a film from prep through through filming and then post-production and then marketing and release I mean it really is. It's like watching.
That's cool.
I mean, it must have been like watching Michelangelo. I I
Mm.
don't mean
That's
to I
amazing.
don't mean to be over emphatic about this, but there's a reason why Jerry is is a household name and
Of
why
course.
he is one of the most famous producers who's ever lived and in the classic tradition of the great ones from the past.
It's very cool to hear that in some ways he's the film fan just like us and just like you know, how you came up in the
Exactly.
industry as well.
Like
Mhm.
Um,
Jerry himself says that his favorite thing to do is to go to a theater with an audience with a box of popcorn and a
Hmm.
drink and watch movies because he loves to gauge what audiences, what they like, what they don't like. Not just his films, but all films. Um, he always has his ears to the track.
Mm.
And that's why this man, after more than 50 years as a producer, is still producing massive hits like Top Gun
yeah,
Maverick.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's an unmatched record, and for me to have been a small part of that over the years, that's why I wanted to get into the movies.
Oh.
So cool. Well, we hope with his ear to the ground that he is hearing loud and clear the demand for National Treasure 3. But we need to get to the wrap up portion here, which is going to start with me subjecting you to our classic National Treasure Hunt speed round. Michael, are you ready to play our game?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do this. If you were an actor and you could play the role of any character in National Treasure, who would you pick?
Sadusky.
Ooh.
Ooh, interesting.
Okay.
We're gonna have to follow up on that one offline because we have thoughts on Sadusky. Really, I have thoughts on Sadusky. What is your favorite quote or scene from the franchise?
Wow, that's hard. But this is
Yeah.
a lightning round, so I have to. Uh, I love, love, love the scene between Ben and the president in National Treasure 2.
Yes.
where Ben is where he's trying to convince him because uh, that's what these films are about. It's
Mhm.
about caring about your country's history and in all the best ways. And I just find that scene so moving.
So do we.
Yeah.
We talk about it very frequently. I'm so glad you
Perfectly.
said that. So we'll go from very serious to very unserious. How many lemons do you think is the appropriate number of lemons to keep in your refrigerator?
Um, a dozen for sure.
Okay, excellent.
Dozen.
I'm real curious about this one now. What is one word that you would use to describe Agent Sadusky?
Fair.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Okay.
Okay. What Sorry, I'm, like, having a hard time containing myself now. What is one conspiracy theory that you would like to learn about from Riley's book?
You mean from the time of National Treasure, when the films were made, or something going on now?
Do you have different answers if I said one or the other?
Okay. Or all right, fine. What really happened to JFK?
All
Mm.
right. And we know
And
he'd have a chapter on that.
mhm,
Mhm.
and all the real information from the Epstein files.
Touche. All right. What is one location at which you would like to see National Treasure 3 eventually film?
Japan.
Ooh.
Ooh. And
Okay.
then this last one, I like to say it's my unfair question. You have to pick National Treasure or Book of Secrets.
You know, I worked. It has to be Book of Secrets because I was there. I worked on it.
That
Yeah.
makes sense
As
to
much
me.
as I love the first film, and I do, but that emotional connection that you have when you were actually there present watching it being made, it has to be Book of Secrets.
No, completely get that. Okay, so I get to ask the last question here. Um, what is one message that you have for National Treasure fans that are definitely listening to this conversation?
Well, first of all, I can only speak for myself to thank them for being so passionate about films that I know were made with so much love and so much care and such a desire to make something lasting and truly unique, um, and to keep the faith because we never know what's around the corner. We can hope.
We can hope. And I
We
love "We
can.
can hope" as our take-home message today. Michael, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for joining us on National Treasure Hunt today.
Thanks to both of you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
We have to have him back.
Yes.
That's my
Like,
first reaction, you know?
yes. Michael, please come back. Um, you have so many more awesome things to share, and we cannot wait to hear them.
Also, like, not for nothing, he has an incredible memory. So, like, he's the type of person that I want to just keep hearing from because whenever there's a little puzzle missing in our picture of how National Treasure came together, he's got the answer. So, I don't know, if you had to pick out the favorite thing that you learned from that conversation, what's yours?
I mean, there's a lot. I think, like, just off the top of my head, I would say his whole conversation about Helen Mirren, and
Mhm.
how just like how excited she was to be part of the film. That's something that he had front and center kind of witness to. And it's something that I think you and I have talked about. Like, we've always hoped that that was the case, but we didn't really know that that was the case. And it just kind of like highlights, I feel like, how impactful these films are and even were at the time of filming.
I totally agree. I thought that was really interesting. We talk a lot about how when we speak with actors, they always bring up almost invariably like how nice John Voight was, right? So when we see something like this where this is the first thing top of mind that came to him when we were like, "All right, stories about the cast." And he's like, "Helen Mirren." And I'm like,
Yeah.
that especially cuz here on the pod we're like, "How did she become a part of this movie?" Like she is,
Right.
you know?
She's
So that
she's
was
way up there.
yes, that was really cool.
Okay, what was your favorite part?
Mm. Okay, so obviously I loved learning about the Cibola flooding because how did we not know that? How has no one brought that up before? But for me at this point, it seems almost counterintuitive, but it's the tiny details that really get me. So, for
Mm,
example, the fact that they had 13 minutes to film at the Lincoln Memorial. And then, we didn't bring this up, but then that scene got cut from the movie, right? It's
it
only in the
did.
trailer. Yeah. Um, or like how this one got me, how filming had to pause at Lafayette Square by the White House so President Bush could address the media. Like
It's just your casual everyday things.
those tiny details are what make this experience for me. They feel like a little nugget, a little reward, because most people don't get to know these things and, when people are kind enough to share them with us, it feels extra special. So, Michael, thank you so much again for joining us on the show. We really do hope to have you back again because we know you have a lot more to share. But we hope y'all learned at least something. Let's be honest, y'all learned a lot from this interview, and you should tell you should tell us what your favorite tidbit was.
Yes, please head on over to our social media at X and Instagram at NT Hunt Podcast. And if you have not already, what are you doing? Subscribe to our YouTube channel, please.
Please do. And of course, stay tuned for more of season 12 of our show. There's lots more coming your way in this first half of 2026. But until then, I'm Aubrey,
And I'm Emily.
and thank you so much for joining us on our National Treasure Hunt.